Welcome back to this Independence Day weekend edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio. One of the most important parts of our independence is perhaps one of the most Virginian parts of it, the Bill of Rights. Why the U.S. Constitution wasn't even going to make it out of committee if it wasn't for James Monroe and brokering the peace between Governor Patrick Henry and James Madison to get a Bill of Rights put onto our U.S. Constitution, and it has stood the test of time. And this past week has been perhaps the most seminal week in the Bill of Rights history, at least as far as my attention to it has been, with the Supreme Court checking off First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment. You are going all the way down the line there. Join us to talk a little bit about it this weekend is Todd Gathje. He is the Director of Government Relations for the Family Foundation. And Todd, happy Independence Day weekend. How are you doing, sir?
Yeah, same to you. Thanks for having me on. We're doing great.
It's a busy time where you guys are. Did you ever think you'd see a day where just one after another, whether it's Carson or Dobbs or Kennedy, just ruling after ruling after ruling came down from the Supreme Court in ways that I never thought would be possible?
Yeah, it's astonishing, really. These have been some amazing Supreme Court decisions that we've seen past couple of weeks, and they do so much for just individual liberty, for school choice, for protecting the sanctity of life. Wow, what a time to be living in, especially as you speak about Dobbs. I never thought I'd see the day that Roe versus Wade would be overturned, but here we are, and we're just so thankful that we have a Supreme Court that, despite all of the protests and people coming to their houses to scream and yell and even try and attempt to kill one of the Supreme Court justices. This has been just an amazing time. We're thankful for their courage.
And you speak of courage. I want to take it and say all of these Supreme Court cases started with individuals who pushed back against the idea that the government had some uninfringible authority to do these things, like a Coach Kennedy. To begin the process, because all of these journeys started years and years ago and took quite a bit of fortitude to get finally to this finish line. That can't be ignored, can it, Todd?
Oh, no. A lot of these cases were long in the making. As you mentioned, Coach Kennedy, that has been a case that has been ongoing, and he's had failure after failure, and finally gets it to the Supreme Court where they say, no, this is a violation of his ability to exercise his religious freedom, and this is not coercion or anything like that. This is him simply exercising his religious freedom. And it does take time for these cases to make its way through the court system, and it does require us to have to be patient. And for those following the pro-life movement, it's been 50 years of patience and hard work.
And some stunning, instances. Certainly, we've had, moments across pop culture, movies, and former Planned Parenthood directors coming out and saying, "I can't believe what I was doing," and to that end, Todd. So now, and I love the Supreme Court's Dobbs ruling, which just says, "Here, it's yours. It's always should have been yours. Do something with it." And handing the state legislators around the country something which I'm sure they're terrified of actually having to craft a law, especially those on the left who not only are going to have to craft a law, but are going to lose this fundraising cudgel. Todd, what as government relations director for the Family Foundation comes next? I know the governor was pretty swift in saying, here are the 4 members of the General Assembly I'm setting aside to craft something, but what about all the other members? And how do you work with them to make sure what comes out is good for everyone?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think time's going to kind of tell as we move along this process and develop some language and work on a piece of legislation that we can hopefully try and move through the legislature. That being said, you have to recognize the fact that the Senate is what it is. It's got a 21-19 Democrat majority. And this past, about 2 weeks ago, we saw where a governor's amendment to include Hyde language in the budget, which would essentially prohibit taxpayers from being forced to have to pay for abortion, that was voted down. It was rejected by the Senate. So we know that there's going to be an uphill battle in the Senate. Now the question is, how can we encourage some members to be able to join? I don't know. But I think that the governor is right to put forward, and we're encouraging this, and we're glad and supportive of the fact that he's putting forward a team to look into a 15-week bill, pain-capable bill, much like what you saw in Mississippi. He's trying to accomplish what he can within the political landscape in which we find ourselves here in Virginia. That being said, for pro-life people, we all look forward to the day that we see no more abortions in Virginia, that we protect life from beginning until from the womb and conception until natural death. But here in Virginia, we do have to work within the parameters and the political landscape in which we find ourselves.
Todd Gathje is on with us. He is the government relations director for the Family Foundation. You were talking about the landscape we're in. That landscape is one where the Senate committees, I don't have any doubt that if a bill crafted carefully and articulately got to the floor of the Senate, you might find, and you've heard from members of the Democratic caucus, Joe Morrissey is perhaps one of the loudest that claim, pro-life, even as a Democrat, you would probably find enough support amongst the Democrats. But my fear is that they'll never see the floor of the Senate because these committees are so gerrymandered, 9-3 in many cases, so that Senator Lucas has a power base that is never going to let the whole body of Democrats or Republicans have a shot at voting for these proposals.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. In fact, we just saw that this past session when Delegate Nick Freitas brought his bill to protect babies that survive a failed abortion, to just give them medical treatment, that it was going through the Senate Education and Health Committee. They realized, well, wait a minute, the Democrats thought they may not have the votes to actually defeat it, so they sent it to a Rules Committee where it was overwhelmingly Democrat majority to ensure that, well, if there is one or two defectors, they can still defeat the bill. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. And as with regards to the composition of the Senate, even if a bill did make it to the floor, even when we saw on Hyde, when some senators in the past have maybe taken a walk, this time they didn't. And in the bill, the Hyde Amendment failed. So trying to get it to the lieutenant governor to break a tie is still going to be a major challenge.
And I think substantively, and this is where I get nerdy on people, is we need to fix that. And I don't care if it means at some points the Republicans aren't going to have as much power as they could. I really think these Senate committees should reflect the body at large, or at very least just make them guaranteed 50-50 with the majority party getting the chair, so that they get the tie-breaking vote in any committee, because I just think that this is going to, even if it was a Republican doing it, leaving Virginians feeling malrepresented by their elected representatives, and I don't think that's good for anyone, Todd.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The House has a tradition of trying to keep things proportional. The Senate right now doesn't seem to be following the same sort of guideline. So the key is changing the composition of the Senate to bring in more pro-family, pro-life senators who are willing to be brave. That's what we need. We need some brave senators to stand up for the sanctity of life.
I know that people hear about the Family Foundation and their immediate thought is the Dobbs ruling. But I want to pivot, Todd, because another thing that Virginia has struggled with over the last the 15 years I've been chronicling it, and all the years you've been coming on this program, Freedom and Prosperity Radio, is in the Carson v. Macon ruling. It's almost forgotten. What was that? If you ask most people at a barbecue, they'll have heard of the Dobbs ruling. They may have even heard of the Kennedy ruling. But Carson v. Macon, this is where the Supreme Court ruled in favor of parents' right to use their school choice money at any school they want, whether it be parochial or not. That's a huge ruling. What do you think can come from the Virginia General Assembly, or is this going to have to be wait till 2023 before we can really see some good school choice action from the General Assembly.
Yeah, you're right. This was a huge decision on the part of the Supreme Court because in that case, Maine did have a sort of a tuition payment program that allowed for these families to send the child to the school of their choice, whether it was public or private. However, they did, as you mentioned, they placed some parameters around the type of private school, that it couldn't be a religious school. And so the Supreme Court steps in and says, no, that's discrimination. This could have huge ramifications for our school choice efforts here in Virginia. Now, that being said, we had a near catastrophe here in Virginia in which the budget that came out of the conference committee actually cut over 50% of the funding for the current scholarship tax credit program that Virginia has. This is a program designed to help low-income families find a private school of their choice that put their child into a school that best meets their needs. And this budget was going to cut that funding. Thankfully, the governor stepped in. They heard from many parents, organizations, groups that support our education opportunities here in Virginia, and was able to restore that funding. It's estimated that had that funding been cut, that at least 300 students of the over 5,000 that this program serves, at least 300 would have lost their scholarships, maybe even more. And we don't know what that would have done to the program itself. But this decision has important ramifications as we try to expand education opportunities in Virginia to education savings accounts. There's going to be a huge push for that, to be able to put more the ability for parents to make better decisions regarding the education of their children, to give them more options, which is what we need here in Virginia.
And certainly, this is a commonwealth where, they use the word charter school, but the charter schools are actually developed by the school boards and the schools. So if somebody moves from out of state where a charter school is actually an independent private operator, and they come here and they say, "What do you mean the school board actually runs the charter schools? How's that work?" So it's a kind of a funny place because the words make implications that aren't necessarily there in it, and we need to tighten that up, because I think the kids, Governor Youngkin's report from just a few months ago on the education and what our kids are achieving should be a wake-up call for everybody.
Yeah. You raise a good point. Charter schools also take a little time to develop. You've got to get the board in place. You have to have the infrastructure. But with scholarship savings, education savings accounts and the scholarship tax credit program, you've already got a mechanism in place. There can be an immediate impact once these programs are put in place. And let me tell you, parents are clamoring for these types of education opportunities. Homeschooling is through the roof right now. People are calling all the time, looking for alternatives to the public school system.
Well, Todd, let's go that direction here. We're visiting with Todd Gathje, Government Relations Director for the Family Foundation. Todd Gathje, Government Relations Director for the Family Foundation. But I know that while you're gearing up for January's General Assembly, there's going to be advocacy. I'm sure the Family Foundation is going to try to get out and talk to as many Virginians as they can, so that their delegates and their senators can hear from them in a clear way, so that it's not just, Todd's knocking on the door, he's going to tell us what they want at the Family Foundation. It's going to be their constituents calling them and saying what they want. Is there a lot coming up, or are you just ramping up for the summer?
Well, no, there is always things that are going on during the summer. We have a great program called Speak Up Virginia, in which our grassroots a coordinator is putting together teams in various localities and then try and develop good, meaningful relationships with elected officials, both at the local and the state level. And that just gets them familiar with the people in the constituents in their area. And it helps for us to be able to bring awareness to certain issues. We're also going to be in local school boards, working on different issues. For example, just recently in Fairfax, they took up and heard and voted on some pretty outrageous policies regarding adding sexual orientation, gender identity to family life education for kindergartners through 5th grade. This is incredible, and they did this. They put this on a consent agenda, which means they just essentially agreed to it, voted on it, and did it at 10 o'clock at night. But we were able to mobilize a significant number of parents and concerned citizens to show up at that school board meeting. This is another example of why school choice or more education opportunities are needed, because it's these types of actions by our local school boards in some of these liberal areas that are pushing parents to find alternatives to the schooling for their children.
And what's amazing in a kind of face-palming way, Todd, is these are the same people that say Coach Kennedy kneeling at the 50-yard line is indoctrination, but cross-dresser story time is not. And that's the part that just befuzzles me, is how they can have such a diverse view of what is indoctrination and what isn't.
That is an excellent point. The last time I checked, we have the freedom of religion, founded in our First Amendment, but nowhere does it say anything about sexual orientation or gender identity. And so we've got to find that balance back in our society again, where we are elevating the rights of freedom of religion and individual liberty above some of those more subjective terms like sexual orientation or gender identity that really have no place, certainly not in a kindergarten through 5th grade class.
Absolutely not. But that's what is happening right now, and it's all to make political points, I think, Todd. And that's what we need to stand against. And that point of free speech and that free association. We have so muddied that water. And that you mentioned Speak Up Virginia. That has been at the avant-garde of parents. Whistleblowing, if you want to use that term, and it's a great, I don't want to say it's a social network, but within the Family Foundation, that social network of parents, whether they be in Albemarle County and often in places like Fairfax, Loudoun, where they pay $100,000 to the assistant of the assistant school superintendent, they can get together and it becomes a force multiplier. So, again, remind people how they can join in on that.
Yeah, so that's a great point. Let me just say that I think as we move forward, there's going to be even greater attention to these local school divisions and exactly the curriculum that's being put in place, who is really having interface with our children. I do want to say that I'm concerned about the counselors now that are going to have access to our children and how they keep hiring all of these counselors to have a role in connecting with our kids, and what are the groups that they're bringing in to instruct them and to train them on issues related to transgenderism. I think that is something that parents really need to be concerned about. And so I think that this summer we're going to be working to try and develop some more publications and forms for parents to be able to give to their schools to remind them of what their rights are, that, hey, under Virginia code and under the law, I have the fundamental right to direct the health and education of my children. And I think parents, we're going to really be trying to promote ways that parents can demonstrate and exercise that fundamental right to their schools.
Well, so powerful are the opponents of that. You watched, a politician savvy enough to have won and helped win everything all the way up to the presidency and certainly the governorship of Virginia, not be able to loose himself from the cables from the educational cabal, the unions and the money changers there. That Terry McAuliffe would commit political suicide on a grand stage just to not offend those folks. So you've got your work cut out for him. So I suggest that, and I say it that way so that people go to familyfoundation.org and support the work you do, because we know where the money is coming from the other side. Unfortunately, this side it's $5 a holler, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the as you mentioned, the teachers unions. I mean, they are very well funded. They have a lot of backing behind them. But I will say that there is a growing, the mama bears are not going away, and they're here to stay, and they're very much involved in what's going on in their schools. And I think you're going to see some additional legislation come this General Assembly that's going to really try and strengthen even more the rights of parents to direct the education of their children.
Well, bless you for helping craft that as director of the government relations for the Family Foundation and working with the folks of Speak Up Virginia. Again, it's familyfoundation.org. Todd, I hope you and everyone have a wonderful Independence Day weekend. I can't think of one recently where so much of the founding of our nation has been on display for everyone to see, and I hope you can enjoy it with family and friends.
Thank you so much. Extra special this year for certain.
Thank you, sir, and you have a blessed day.
All right, you too. Thank you.
And just a moment here at the very end of our program to remind you of these blessings and that the concern that the fragility of them is important. But you see that over 200 and change years, this Bill of Rights has, though questioned, sometimes ignored, sometimes forgotten, remains unequivocal, remains unchallengeable in its simplicity and the brilliance of what was done when a Virginian said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And amongst those rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And to ensure those rights," the Attorney General of Virginia once opened a conference by pointing out, people forget that right after that part comes and to ensure those rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the governed. That's from memory. And it's important to remember that. The just powers come from the governed. Last time I checked, the deed to this country still has our name on it. We the people, right at the top. So as you celebrate Independence Weekend, understand that that's individual independence, and that means individual responsibilities. Because each one of those rights comes with responsibilities. And we need to make sure that we're upholding them as much as we're upholding our rights. Happy birthday, America. God bless America. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next weekend from the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. And all of us here, I'm Joe Thomas. So long, and thanks for all the fish.